August 18th, 1945. The morning sun cut through the Texas heat like a blade. Inside the mess hall at Camp Norton, California, a young Japanese woman stood frozen before a simple breakfast plate. Her name was Akiko Tanaka. She was 23 years old, a radio operator, a prisoner of war, and she was about to discover that everything she had been taught about Americans was a lie. The plate before her held 4 strips of bacon, crispy, sizzling, golden brown, 3 scrambled eggs still steaming, 2 slices of white bread thick with butter that melted into golden pools, a cup of coffee, dark, strong, the steam rising like prayers. Behind Akiko, 46 other Japanese women stood in 2 silent lines. Their hands trembled at their sides. Their eyes darted between the food and the American soldiers watching them. They had been told that Americans would starve them, torture them, burn them alive. But this was something their propaganda had never prepared them for. This was abundance. This was kindness. This was impossible. Akiko picked up a strip of bacon. Her fingers shook. She brought it to her lips. The salt hit her tongue first, then the smoke, then the fat rich and warm and impossibly good. She had not tasted meat in 6 months, had not seen bacon in 2 years, had forgotten that food could taste like this, like life, like hope. Tears began to fall. They streamed down her cheeks, landed on the plate, mixed with the butter and the eggs. She tried to stop them, could not. The bacon was still in her mouth. The flavor was still exploding across her senses, and she was crying like a child. An American sergeant stood 10 feet away, watching. His name was Jake Morrison. He was 28 years old, tall, red hair, Texas-born, and 4 months ago, Japanese soldiers had killed his younger brother on Iwo Jima. Jake had every reason to hate the women standing before him, every reason to let them starve, every reason to turn his back and walk away. But he did not, because at his brother's funeral he had made a promise to his father, a promise to himself, a promise to stay human even when the world demanded monsters. Now watching Akiko cry over a plate of bacon, Jake spoke. His voice was quiet, gentle. The words would echo in her memory for 60 years. What did he say? And why did this single breakfast change the course of her entire life? The answer begins 2 days earlier, on a dock in San Francisco where an angry mob waited to kill them all. August 16, 1945, 2 days before the breakfast. The fog hung thick over San Francisco Bay. Through the gray mist, a transport ship appeared, slow, heavy, carrying cargo that America did not want. On the deck, 47 Japanese women gripped the rail with white knuckles. They wore the remains of their military uniforms, torn, stained, faded by weeks at sea. They were auxiliary personnel, radio operators, nurses, secretaries, captured across the Pacific Islands as Japan collapsed, now being brought to enemy soil, to face judgment, to face death. And as the ship approached the dock, the fog lifted, and they heard the sound. At first it was distant, a rumble, like thunder rolling across water. But as they drew closer, the sound grew. Louder, sharper, more focused. It was voices, hundreds of voices, thousands, all screaming the same words. Remember Pearl Harbor? Killers, murderers, send them back to hell. The crowd packed the dock like a wall of rage. 500 people, maybe more. Men, women, teenagers, their faces twisted with hatred, their fists raised toward the sky. American flags waved violently overhead. Handmade signs bobbed above the mass of bodies. My son died at Iwo Jima. War criminals. No mercy for the enemy. Akiko felt her legs go weak. She grabbed the woman beside her for support. Around her, others began to cry. Some prayed. Some whispered final words to loved ones who would never hear them. They had expected punishment. They had expected prison. But this was a mob that wanted blood. The ship's engines cut to idle. Ropes flew to the dock. The gangway clanged into place. Metal on metal. The sound of a door opening to hell. An American officer appeared. He shouted in broken Japanese, "Form line, walk, no run, no talk." The women formed 2 lines, their bodies pressed close together. seeking comfort in nearness. Their hearts hammered against their ribs. Their breathing came quick and shallow. As the first woman stepped onto the gangway, a rock flew through the air. It struck the metal beside her foot. The clang echoed across the water. The crowd roared louder. This was not the beginning they had imagined. This was terror. This was the end. The moment the first woman's foot touched the dock, the crowd surged forward. Police officers in dark uniforms struggled to hold back the wall of bodies pressing against wooden barriers. The barriers creaked, bent, nearly broke. A woman in the front row screamed at the prisoners. She was maybe 50 years old, her face red with rage, spit flying from her mouth. "My son died at Iwo Jima. You monsters. You murderers," others joined. Their voices blended into a wall of hatred so thick it felt physical, like a force pushing against the prisoners, trying to crush them, trying to make them disappear. The Japanese women froze. Training had taught them to march in formation, to follow orders, to maintain dignity, but training had not prepared them for this. Several women stumbled, nearly fell. Others raised their arms over their heads, protecting themselves from the objects flying through the air. Rocks, bottles, wadded paper, even shoes. Then 20 American soldiers ran forward. They formed a corridor along both sides of the prisoner line. Young men in United States Army uniforms, their faces serious, tense. They did not look at the prisoners. They looked at the crowd, and they stood between them. At the head of the formation was Sergeant Jake Morrison. 6'4", broad shoulders, red hair cut military short, freckles across his nose despite 4 years in the Pacific sun. He had grown up on a ranch in Texas, had learned to rope cattle before he learned to read, had enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, had seen combat in the Philippines, had watched friends die, had killed enemy soldiers, had buried his brother 4 months ago. Now he positioned himself directly beside Akiko. She was in the middle of the line, terrified, shaking. A bottle flew toward her, glass glinting in the sun. Jake stepped in front of it. The bottle struck his shoulder, shattered. Glass rained down. He did not flinch, did not even turn his head. He just adjusted his stance and kept walking. Akiko stared at his back, confused. Why would he protect her? She was the enemy. She had worked for the Japanese military, had helped coordinate communications that led to battles where Americans died. This man should hate her. This man should want her dead. Yet here he was, using his body as a shield. The walk from ship to trucks was only 200 yards, but it felt like miles. Every step brought new screams, new insults, new objects thrown through the air. A young woman near the front of the line suddenly collapsed. She was barely 20, a secretary, terrified beyond endurance. Her legs gave out. She fell to her knees on the dock. The crowd cheered, mocked her tears, wanted more. But before the guards could react, another prisoner moved. An older woman named Fumiko Hayashi, 36 years old, a senior nurse, widow. She bent down and lifted the crying girl to her feet. "We walk with dignity," Fumiko said quietly in Japanese. "We do not give them the satisfaction of seeing us broken." The girl wiped her eyes, nodded. Together they continued forward. 3 military trucks waited at the end of the dock. Canvas covers rolled back. The guards directed the women toward them. Working quickly now, the crowd was getting more aggressive. More people were trying to break through the barriers. Police whistles shrieked. Someone threw a glass bottle that shattered on the ground near the prisoners. Sharp fragments scattered across the wood. Get in now," one officer shouted, pointing at the trucks. The women scrambled up, helping each other into the truck beds. There were no seats, just hard metal floors. They pressed together, trying to make room for everyone. Akiko found herself squished between 2 other women, all of them breathing hard, all of them trembling. As the last women climbed aboard, the guards jumped up after them. They stood at the back of each truck, facing outward toward the crowd, creating a human barrier between the prisoners and the mob. Jake was right there, his back to Akiko, his hand resting on the rifle slung over his shoulder. He did not draw the weapon, but the message was clear. He would if he had to. The truck engines roared to life. The vehicles lurched forward. The crowd followed. running alongside, still screaming, still throwing things. A man with a face twisted by pure hatred got close enough to spit at the truck. The guards did not move. They just stood there, solid, unmoving, like human walls. As the trucks pulled away from the waterfront and turned onto city streets, the crowd gradually fell behind, though their screams echoed between the buildings, bounced off brick and concrete, followed the trucks like ghosts. Finally, after several minutes, the noise faded. The women in the truck sat in stunned silence, their eyes wide, their bodies still shaking with adrenaline and fear. One woman started to cry, then another. Soon, soft sobs filled the truck. The sound of relief and shock mixed together. They were alive. They had made it through the mob, but at what cost? And what came next? Jake Morrison turned around. For the first time, he looked directly at the prisoners. His eyes moved from face to face. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down, at the edge of the truck bed, lowering himself to their level, not standing above them, not towering over them. Equal. He pulled a canteen from his belt, held it out toward them. "Water," he said. His voice was rough from shouting orders, but not unkind. "Hot day. Drink." The women stared at the canteen. No one moved. Was it a trick? Was the water poisoned? Was this some kind of test? Jake waited. When no one took the canteen, he lifted it to his own lips and drank, showing them it was safe. Then he held it out again. Water. Drink. Hot day. Finally, Fumiko reached out, the senior nurse, the one who had helped the fallen girl. She took the canteen carefully, sniffed it, then took a small sip. Her eyes widened. It was cool, clean, not the warm, metallic-tasting liquid they had been given on the ship. She drank more, then passed it to the woman next to her. The canteen moved from hand to hand. When it was empty, Jake refilled it from a larger container at the front of the truck. Passed it back. This happened 3 times, until all the women had drunk their fill. Akiko was one of the last to drink. When she handed the canteen back to Jake, she spoke, in careful English learned in school before the war. "Thank you." Jake looked surprised. "You speak English little bit, small." She held her thumb and finger close together to show how little. Jake nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then said something that would change everything. "That crowd at the dock. That's not everyone, you understand. Not everyone is like that." Akiko was not sure she understood all the words, but she understood the tone. He was trying to tell her something important. She nodded slowly. "Those people," Jake continued, gesturing back toward the city. "They lost sons, brothers, husbands in the war. They're angry. They're hurt. But they won't hurt you. We won't let them." "Why?" Akiko asked, the question burning in her mind. "We are enemy." Jake looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes steady, serious. Then he said something that would stay with her forever, something that would echo through decades, something that would define the rest of her life. "The war is over. You're prisoners now." "Yes, but you're also people, and we don't let mobs hurt people. That's not who we are." He said it so simply, like it was obvious, like it was the only way things could be. But to Akiko, it was revolutionary. In the Japanese military, prisoners were considered less than human. Capture was the ultimate dishonor. Prisoners had no rights, no protections, no dignity. Yet here was this American guard, this enemy soldier, telling her that even as his enemy, she was still a person deserving of safety. The contradiction was almost impossible to process. As the truck continued through the California countryside, Akiko stared at the back of Jake's head, trying to understand, trying to reconcile everything she had been taught with everything she was experiencing. The war might be over, but a different kind of battle was just beginning, a battle inside her own mind, between what she had believed and what she was starting to see. If this story moves you, if you've ever wondered what truly makes America different, then you need to hear what happens next. Because in the following days, Akiko and the other prisoners would discover something that no propaganda could have prepared them for. They would discover American values in action, and those values would shake everything they thought they knew. If you served during this time, or if your father, did you know how much hatred existed on both sides? You know how easy it would have been for Jake Morrison to turn his back. to let that mob have its way, to choose revenge over mercy. But he didn't. And in the next hour, you'll discover why his choice mattered, why American kindness became more powerful than Japanese propaganda, why a breakfast of bacon and eggs would bring a young woman to tears, and why 30 years later, a reunion would prove that enemies can become friends. Make sure to like this video and let us know in the comments. Did your family interact with prisoners of war during or after the war? We would love to hear your stories because these moments, these choices, these small acts of human decency, this is what defines us. This is what makes us American. Now let's continue, because what happened at Camp Norton would change not just Akiko's life, but the course of history itself. Jake Morrison was not born a soldier. He was born a cowboy. Raised on Morrison Ranch in West Texas, 1,500 acres of hard earth and harder lessons. His father, William Morrison, was 62 years old, weathered like old leather, strong like rope, and wise in the way that only men who work with their hands can be. William taught his sons three things: how to rope cattle, how to mend fence, and how to treat people with dignity, especially people who couldn't fight back. That's the cowboy code, William would say. That's what separates men from animals. You fight fair, you win with honor, and when the fight's over, you extend your hand, even to your enemy, especially to your enemy. Jake had a younger brother, Tom, 19 years old when he died, bright, funny, quick with a joke, and slow to anger. Tom had enlisted right after Jake, wanted to serve together, wanted to protect America together. They trained together, shipped out together, fought in the Philippines together. Then Tom got orders to Iwo Jima. Jake stayed behind on occupation duty, and 3 weeks into the battle, Tom was gone, killed by a Japanese machine gun nest. Never came home. At Tom's funeral, Jake stood beside his father, both of them in dress uniform, both of them crying. The flag lay draped over Tom's coffin, red, white, blue, the colors Tom had died for. William put his hand on Jake's shoulder. Your brother died fighting for America, not for revenge, not for hatred, for American values. Jake's voice was thick. Pop, he died because Japanese soldiers killed him. How am I supposed to not hate them? William turned to face his son. You think hate makes you strong. Hate makes you weak. It makes you just like the enemy. Your brother died believing America was better. Are you going to prove him wrong? No, sir. Then you remember this. A cowboy doesn't kick a man when he's down. Doesn't matter if that man's your enemy. You fight fair. You win with honor. And when the fight's over, you extend your hand. That's the cowboy code. That's the American way. Jake wiped his eyes. I promise, Pop. I won't let hate win. That promise brought Jake to Camp Norton. That promise put him on the dock in San Francisco. That promise made him step in front of a flying bottle to protect a young Japanese woman he had never met. Because a promise to a cowboy is not just words. It is law. It is identity. It is who you are when nobody's watching. And Jake Morrison kept his promises. Akiko Tanaka was not born a soldier either. She was born in Osaka, middle-class family. Her father owned a small printing shop. Her mother taught flower arrangement. Akiko was educated, smart, spoke some English, played piano, dreamed of becoming a teacher. Then the war came. In 1943, when Akiko was 21, the Japanese government called for volunteers, women to support the military effort, radio operators, nurses, secretaries. It was presented as patriotic duty, as honor, as the only way a woman could serve her country. Akiko's father was proud when she volunteered. Her mother cried, but they both waved goodbye when she left for training. Neither of them knew they would never see her again. Akiko was assigned to Saipan, a small island in the Pacific, remote, hot, surrounded by ocean and increasingly by American ships. She worked in a communications bunker, relaying messages, coordinating supply requests, reporting troop movements. She was good at her job, efficient, careful. She believed she was serving Japan, serving honor, serving the emperor. The propaganda was constant. Loudspeakers played messages daily. Americans are devils. They rape women. They burn prisoners alive. They show no mercy. Death is better than capture. If the Americans come, take your own life. Preserve your honor. Do not let them touch you. Akiko believed it all. Why wouldn't she? It came from her government, from her superiors, from people she trusted. She had seen American planes bomb the island, had seen the destruction they caused, had heard the explosions that shook the ground. Americans were the enemy. They were cruel. They were inhuman. Then Saipan fell. The Americans landed, swept across the island, overran the Japanese positions. Akiko's bunker was captured before she could follow the final order, before she could take her own life. She expected death, torture, violation, everything the propaganda had promised. Instead, an American soldier paid her water, put her on a transport ship, sent her to California, and now she sat in a truck, drinking clean water from an enemy's canteen, listening to him say she was still a person, and everything she had ever believed was cracking like thin ice under pressure. The trucks drove for over an hour, leaving the city behind, moving into countryside that seemed impossibly green after the gray wasteland of war-torn Japan. Fields stretched on both sides of the road, trees lined the highway, houses stood intact, painted white and yellow, gardens in front, children playing in yards. Normal life, untouched life. The women stared at everything, trying to understand what they were seeing. This was the enemy nation, this place of abundance and peace. Where were the ruins? Where were the hungry children and burned buildings? Everything they had been told about America, that it was suffering, that it was weak, that it was on the verge of collapse. All of it was lies. The evidence was right in front of them, undeniable, overwhelming. Akiko watched a woman hanging laundry in her backyard as the truck passed. Just a normal woman, doing a normal task in a normal world. It seemed impossible. It seemed like a dream. In Japan, women were digging through rubble for scraps of food. Here they hung clean clothes to dry in the sun. Finally, the trucks pulled through gates topped with barbed wire. Camp Norton, a temporary holding facility in the Central Valley of California. Chain-link fences surrounded the compound. Guard towers rose at each corner. Wooden barracks stood in neat rows. It looked like a prison, because it was a prison, but something was different. The paths between the barracks were swept clean. Small gardens with flowers grew near the administrative buildings. The guards in the towers looked relaxed, almost bored, not aggressive, not threatening, just watching. As the women climbed down from the trucks, their legs stiff from the long ride, they bunched together instinctively, finding safety in numbers. American soldiers watched them from various points around the camp, but none approached aggressively, none shouted, none raised weapons. An officer with gray hair and glasses walked forward, holding a clipboard. He was maybe 55 years old, career military by the look of him, pressed uniform, straight posture. But his face was not cruel, just serious. "I am Major Roberts," he said in slow, careful English. "This is your camp until we determine your final placement. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention for Prisoners of War. You will receive food, shelter, medical care, and clothing. You will work, but work will be light and paid. You will not be harmed." A Japanese-American interpreter stepped forward, a young woman in United States Army uniform. She translated everything into Japanese. The prisoners listened in silence, their faces showing nothing. They had learned not to show emotion, not to reveal weakness. This could still be a trick, a trap, a way to break them psychologically before the real torture began. First Major Roberts continued, "You will go to processing. You will receive medical examination, clean clothing, and hot showers. Your belongings will be cataloged. Any personal items not considered dangerous will be returned to you. You will then be assigned to barracks and given your daily schedule." The word showers sent a ripple of fear through the women. In Japanese propaganda, they had been told that American showers were actually gas chambers, that this was how the Americans would execute them. Efficient, quick, painless. Several women grabbed each other's hands, preparing for the worst. But Major Roberts just nodded to a female officer, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes. She gestured for the prisoners to follow her. "Come on, ladies. Let's get you cleaned up." The processing building was long and narrow, divided into sections. First came the medical station, where American nurses waited with stethoscopes and blood pressure cuffs. The prisoners were examined one by one. Weight, height, temperature, blood pressure. Examination of any wounds or illnesses. When Akiko's name was called, she stepped forward, her heart hammering. A nurse named Helen Patterson smiled at her. Helen was 42 years old, from Iowa originally. Farm girl, strong hands, warm eyes. "Hello, honey. Let's see how you're doing." The examination was thorough but gentle. Helen checked Akiko's breathing, looked in her ears and throat, examined her hands and feet. When she discovered a long scar on Akiko's arm from a piece of shrapnel, she made a sympathetic sound. "That must have hurt. Does it still bother you?" Akiko understood enough English to shake her head. The scar was old. From a bombing raid on Saipan months ago, it had healed, though it still ached sometimes at night. Helen made notes on her clipboard, then handed Akiko a small paper cup with 2 white pills. "Vitamins. You're malnourished. These will help." Akiko stared at the pills, fear rising again. Poison. This was how they would do it. Not in the showers. Here. Quiet. Simple. Helen seemed to understand. She took another cup, dumped 2 identical pills into her own hand, swallowed them with water, then smiled and pointed at Akiko's cup. "Your turn." Akiko swallowed the pills. They tasted bitter, but not unusual, not like poison, just like medicine. Helen patted her shoulder. "Good girl. Next station." At each stop, the women were treated with matter-of-fact professionalism. No one yelled, no one threatened, no one hurt them. It was so different from what they expected that it was almost more frightening than cruelty would have been. Cruelty they understood. Cruelty fit their expectations. Kindness was a mystery. Kindness did not make sense. The shower room was the final station. Steam rose from behind a row of curtained stalls. The prisoners stood in a tight group near the entrance, frozen with fear. This was it. This was where the executions would happen, where the wax would pour from the shower heads, where they would die. Several women began to cry. Others prayed quietly, making peace with death. The female officer in charge was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Japanese-American, 30 years old, born in California. Her family had been put in internment camps for 3 years during the war. She understood fear. She understood discrimination. She understood what it meant to be seen as the enemy. Sarah spoke to them in Japanese. "I know what you've been told. I know you think the showers are something terrible. They're not. They're just showers. Hot water. Soap. That's all. Watch." She walked into one of the stalls, fully clothed, turned on the water. Hot water streamed out, creating clouds of steam. She put her hand under it, letting the water run over her fingers. Then she walked back out. Her uniform sleeves soaked. "See? Just water." Still no one moved. Sarah sighed. "I'll tell you what. I'll be right here the whole time. The door stays open. If anything bad happens, which it won't, you can run out. But you need to wash. You've been on a ship for 2 weeks. You need to be clean for your health." Finally, Fumiko stepped forward. The senior nurse. The widow. The one who had helped the fallen girl on the dock. "I will go first. If I die, you will know." She walked into a stall, her back straight, her head high. The other women held their breath. The water turned on. They heard the sound of it hitting the tiles, hitting skin. Then after a long moment, they heard something else. A long, deep sigh of relief. Fumiko's voice came from behind the curtain, speaking in Japanese. "It's real. It's just water. Hot water and soap. Real soap." One by one, the other women entered the stalls. Akiko found herself in a small space with white tiles, a shower head above, and a bar of white soap on a metal dish. She turned the knob. Hot water burst out, warmer than anything she had felt in months. She stood under it, letting it soak her hair, her skin, washing away the grime and oil and fear. She picked up the soap. It smelled like flowers, lavender maybe, or roses. In Japan, toward the end of the war, soap had become impossible to find. People washed with ash and water, or nothing at all. But here was real soap, thick and white, the kind her mother had used before the war. Before everything changed, Akiko began to cry. She could not help it. The tears mixed with the shower water running down her face. It was not grief exactly, not relief, something more complicated, a release of tension she had been holding for months, maybe years. The hot water and soap were not just cleaning her body, they were stripping away layers of propaganda and fear, exposing something raw underneath, something human. When she finally turned off the water and stepped out, a clean towel and fresh clothing waited on a bench. A simple gray dress, underwear, socks, canvas shoes, no uniform, just plain clothes. She dried herself and dressed, her movements slow, almost mechanical. The woman who emerged from that shower room was not the same woman who had entered. Something had changed. The war had told her that Americans were monsters. The mob at the dock had seemed to confirm it. But the guards who protected her, the nurse who examined her gently, the hot water and soap given freely, these things did not match the story she had been taught. And that mismatch was creating a crack in the wall of belief she had built her entire life upon. After showers and clean clothes, the women were led to the mess hall, a long building with rows of tables and benches. The smell hit them the moment they entered. Coffee, bread, meat, something sweet. Several women stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the scent of real food. They had not eaten since early morning. Just a small rice bowl on the ship. Now it was late afternoon. Their stomachs were empty and cramping, but still fear held them back. Food could be poison. This could still be a trap. The mess hall was already half full of American soldiers eating their lunch. The soldiers looked up when the prisoners entered, their conversations stopping mid-sentence. The silence was thick, uncomfortable. Some soldiers stared with curiosity, others with obvious dislike. A few turned away, refusing to look at the Japanese women at all. The tension was palpable, real, dangerous. But then an older soldier stood up, a sergeant with gray at his temples, maybe 45 years old. He walked to the serving line, filled a tray with food, 2 slices of bread, a scoop of stew, carrots, a cup of coffee. He walked to an empty table, sat down, and began to eat. Completely normal, completely calm. The message was clear. The food is safe, Major Roberts gestured to the prisoners. Form a line. Get your food. Sit and eat. Slowly, hesitantly. The women moved forward. Akiko found herself at the serving counter, where a cook in a stained white apron plopped a large spoonful of beef stew onto her plate. She stared at it. There were chunks of meat, actual meat, floating in thick brown gravy. 2 slices of white bread appeared next to it, then carrots, then a cup filled with dark coffee. It was more food than she had seen in a single meal in 6 months. She carried her tray to a table where other prisoners were already sitting. They all stared at their plates, unsure. Finally, Fumiko picked up her spoon, took a small taste of the stew, her eyes closed. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "It's good. It's real." That was all the permission the others needed. They began to eat, tentatively at first, then faster, their hunger overcoming their fear. Some women ate so quickly they made themselves cough. Others ate slowly, as if trying to make it last forever. Akiko bit into the white bread. It was soft, slightly sweet. The butter melted on her tongue. The stew was rich and warm. The meat was tender. She wanted to cry again, but she forced herself to keep control. Not here, not in front of everyone. Around the mess hall, the American soldiers had resumed eating and talking, though many still glanced at the prisoners occasionally. Jake Morrison sat at a nearby table. He caught Akiko's eye, gave a small nod. She nodded back, unsure what it meant, but feeling somehow that an understanding had been reached. They were enemies, but they were also somehow sharing a meal. And that simple act, eating in the same room, breathing the same air, was more revolutionary than any speech or declaration could have been. But the most important meal was still to come. Tomorrow morning, when Jake Morrison would personally serve Akiko a plate that would change everything. 4 strips of bacon, 3 scrambled eggs, 2 slices of buttered toast, and a truth so powerful it would echo for 60 years. That tomorrow, that breakfast, that moment of tears, that is where our story truly begins. The next morning arrived with the Texas sun, August 18th, 1945, the day of the breakfast that would change everything. Akiko woke to a bell ringing at 6 a.m., Around her in the barracks, 46 other women stirred on their bunks. Real beds, with real mattresses, clean sheets, pillows, things they had not experienced in months. Some of them had cried themselves to sleep the night before, not from fear this time, from confusion, from the impossible contradiction of enemy kindness. They washed their faces in cold water from communal sinks, brushed their teeth with toothbrushes provided by the Americans. Actual toothbrushes, with actual toothpaste that tasted like mint. In Japan, people had been using charcoal and salt for years. Toothpaste was a luxury from another lifetime. At 6:30, they formed lines outside the barracks. Jake Morrison and 3 other guards waited to escort them to breakfast. The morning air was cool, fresh. The camp was quiet except for birdsong and the distant sound of other prisoners moving about. It was peaceful, strange. Nothing like the chaos and terror of war. The mess hall smelled like heaven. Coffee, strong and dark, bacon, sizzling, smoky, eggs, fresh. The scent of butter melting on hot toast. The women filed in, their stomachs already growling despite the fear still lurking in their hearts. American soldiers sat at tables, eating, reading newspapers, talking quietly. Normal morning routines, as if having Japanese prisoners eat breakfast beside them was the most natural thing in the world. Jake stood at the serving line. He had volunteered for this duty, had asked Major Roberts specifically to let him serve the prisoners their first real American breakfast, because he remembered what his father had said. You extend your hand, especially to your enemy. When Akiko reached the front of the line, Jake looked at her, really looked at her, saw the fear still hiding behind her eyes, saw the confusion, saw the young woman who had been taught to hate him, who had every reason to hate him, and he made a choice. He picked up a plate, clean, white, ceramic, heavy, real. He placed 4 strips of bacon on it, the kind his mother used to make on the ranch, thick cut, crispy, golden brown. The fat still glistening. He added 3 scrambled eggs, fluffy, yellow, cooked with butter and a pinch of salt. 2 slices of white bread, toasted golden, spread thick with real butter that melted into pools. A cup of coffee, black, strong, the steam rising like morning fog. He set the plate on the counter between them, met her eyes, and said something he had been thinking about all night, something his father would have said, something Tom would have wanted him to see. Ma'am, this is breakfast, real American breakfast, like my mama used to make back in Texas. Akiko stared at the plate, at the abundance, at the impossible generosity. This was more food than she had seen in 3 months, more protein than she had eaten in 6. The bacon alone represented wealth beyond measure. In Japan, people were killing each other over handfuls of rice. Here the enemy was giving her bacon. She picked up the plate with shaking hands, carried it to a table, sat down. The other women around her had similar plates, similar expressions of disbelief. They looked at each other, silently asking the same question. Is this real? Can we trust this? Fumiko spoke first, the senior nurse, the practical one. We eat. We need strength. Whatever comes next, we face it with full bellies. Akiko picked up a strip of bacon. The grease coated her fingers, warm, slick. She brought it to her mouth, bit down, and her world exploded. The salt hit first, sharp, clean, perfect. Then the smoke, deep, rich, like campfires in autumn and home. Then the fat, melting on her tongue, coating her mouth. The texture was crispy on the outside, tender on the inside. The flavor was so intense, it was almost painful. Like her taste buds had forgotten what real food tasted like. Like her body was remembering something it had lost. She chewed slowly, swallowed. The warmth traveled down her throat, settled in her stomach. Real food, real nutrition, real kindness. And then the tears came. They started slowly, just a wetness at the corners of her eyes, then faster, streaming down her cheeks, landing on the plate, mixing with the butter and the eggs. She tried to stop them, could not. The bacon was still in her mouth. The flavor was still overwhelming her senses, and she was crying like a child who had been lost and was finally found. Around her, other women were crying too, silent tears, shoulders shaking, hands covering faces, not from sadness, from something else, something that had no name. Relief maybe, or gratitude, or the simple shock of being treated like a human being by people who should want them dead. Jake watched from the serving line. He did not smile, did not look proud, just watched, making sure they ate, making sure they were safe, keeping his promise to his father, keeping his promise to Tom. After a few minutes, he walked over to Akiko's table, stood beside her. She looked up, her face wet, her eyes red, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she said in broken English. "I did not mean to cry." Jake shook his head. "Nothing to be sorry for, ma'am." He paused, then said the words that would echo through her life, through decades, through generations. "I lost my baby brother 4 months ago. Japanese soldier killed him at Iwo Jima. I could hate you. Part of me wants to. But my brother didn't die so I could become a monster. He died for American values. And one of those values is we treat people with dignity, even our enemies. Especially our enemies. That's what makes us American." Akiko stared at him, understanding perhaps half the words, but understanding all of the meaning. This man had lost his brother, to her people, to her country, and still he fed her, still he protected her, still he saw her as human. She bowed her head, a small gesture, Japanese, respectful. When she looked up again, her voice was steady despite the tears. "Thank you, Sergeant Morrison, for brother, for breakfast, for everything." Jake nodded. "Eat up. Long day ahead." He walked back to the serving line, left her sitting there, bacon grease on her fingers, tears on her cheeks, and a crack forming in the wall of everything she had been taught. A crack that would only grow wider with each passing day. The breakfast that morning became legendary at Camp Norton. The guards talked about it. The prisoners talked about it. The moment when enemies broke bread together. When bacon became more powerful than propaganda. When American kindness proved stronger than Japanese hatred. But the breakfast was just the beginning. Over the following days, a routine established itself. The bell at 6 a.m., washing, breakfast, then work assignments. The women were divided into groups, some assigned to the camp laundry, others to the vegetable gardens, a few to help in the kitchen. The work was light, nothing like the grueling labor they had done during the war. And they were paid actual money. Camp script that could be spent at the canteen. The canteen was a revelation in itself. On the third day, Akiko was allowed to visit a small wooden building near the center of camp. Inside, shelves held items that seemed to belong to a different universe. Chocolate bars, Hershey's, Nestle, rows and rows of them. Cigarettes for those who smoked, writing paper, pencils, small toiletry items, toothbrushes, hand cream, soap that smelled like flowers. Akiko stood in front of the chocolate display for a full minute, just staring. In Japan, chocolate had disappeared years ago. Even military officers rarely got any. It was a luxury from before the war, a memory, a dream. But here in a prisoner of war camp, it sat on shelves, available for purchase, with money they earned from light work. She bought a Hershey bar with her first week's wages. Brown wrapper, simple, classic. That night in the barracks, she unwrapped it slowly. The chocolate was dark, smooth. She broke off a square. Put it in her mouth. Let it melt on her tongue. The sweetness exploded, rich, deep, perfect. She closed her eyes, savored it, made it last. Around her, other women did the same with their own small treasures. Some had cigarettes, some had soap, some had writing paper. They sat on their bunks in the evening light, experiencing small joys, small freedoms, things that should not exist in a prison camp, but did. One woman whispered in the darkness, "This makes no sense. Why do they give us chocolate? Why do they feed us like this? Why do they treat us better than our own military did at the end?" No one had an answer, but everyone was thinking it. The work in the gardens became Akiko's assignment. She had some experience. Her grandfather had been a farmer before moving to the city, had taught her about plants when she was young. Now she found herself kneeling in California soil, pulling weeds under the hot sun, watering vegetables, tending rows of lettuce and carrots and tomatoes. On the fifth day, Jake Morrison walked past while she was working. He stopped, watched her pull weeds for a moment, then spoke. "You're doing that wrong." Akiko looked up, surprised. afraid she had made an error that would bring punishment. Jake knelt down beside her, like this. He showed her how to grip the weed at the base, how to pull firmly so the roots came out whole, how to shake off the soil before tossing it aside. If you just pull the top, he explained, the roots stay. It grows back. You have to get the whole thing. He stood up, brushed the dirt from his hands. That's how my pop taught me. On the ranch, good luck. He walked away, did not wait for thanks, did not make a big show of it. Just a man teaching a skill. A cowboy helping someone learn to do a job right. But to Akiko, it was something more. It was another crack in the wall, another moment of ordinary human kindness from someone who should be her enemy. It was hard to hate someone who showed you how to weed a garden. Hard to fear someone who took the time to teach you something useful. Hard to see them as monsters when they treated you with patience and respect. These moments happened again and again, small interactions that chipped away at the propaganda. The guard who helped lift a heavy laundry basket. The cook who gave them extra portions when food was available. The officer who said good morning and actually seemed to mean it. Each moment small, each moment ordinary. But together they added up to something revolutionary. 3 weeks into captivity, Major Roberts made an announcement. The women were gathered in the main hall. The interpreter, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, translated his words carefully. You are permitted to write letters home. They will be read by censors for security purposes. But anything not concerning military information will be sent through the Red Cross. Paper and pencils are available. The news hit like a thunderclap. Letters home, contact with their families, proof of life, but also proof of what? Proof that they were prisoners. Proof that they had survived when honor demanded they should have died. Proof that they were being fed and treated well by the enemy. That night in the barracks, the women gathered around the tables, paper and pencils spread before them. But most stared at the blank pages, unable to write, trapped between truth and loyalty, between honesty and shame. Akiko sat with a pencil in her hand, the tip resting on white paper. She thought about her mother, back in Osaka, if Osaka still stood, if her mother still lived. What could she write? How could she explain? Dear mother, I'm alive. I was captured by the Americans. They feed me bacon and eggs every morning. They give me chocolate. They teach me how to pull weeds. They treat me with kindness. But writing those words felt like betrayal, like propaganda, like she had been brainwashed, like she had forgotten who she was, what she owed to Japan, to her father who died in the firebombing, to the emperor, to honor itself. Around her, the division among the prisoners became visible, crystallized by this simple act of letter writing. Fumiko wrote honestly, her pragmatism overcoming her guilt. Mother, she wrote in careful characters, I do not know how to tell you this. The enemy feeds us well. We have shelter and medicine. I am ashamed to be healthy while you suffer. But I want you to know I am alive. I will come home when allowed. Please survive until then. Another group of women refused to write at all, led by a young woman named Hana Kimura, 21 years old, former secretary, hardcore believer. She stood up from her table, glared at Fumiko. You accept their charity like a beggar. Have you forgotten who we are? Fumiko looked up, calm. I remember who we are. Survivors. And I won't apologize for surviving. Hana's voice rose. This comfort is poison. They want us to forget our duty, our loyalty. Every meal is a bribe. Every kindness is manipulation. Akiko found herself speaking, the words coming before she could stop them. But what if what we were taught was the lie? Silence fell across the barracks, heavy, dangerous. Women stopped writing, stopped breathing, just stared. Hana turned to Akiko, her face twisted with anger and hurt. You're becoming one of them. No, Akiko's voice was quiet but firm. I'm remembering I'm a human being. There's a difference. Fumiko stood, placed herself between Hana and Akiko. We're all struggling with this. All of us, but anger won't help. Neither will denial. We have to face the truth, and the truth is that we were lied to. About Americans, about honor, about what happens to prisoners. Hana's voice broke. If everything we were taught was a lie, then what did our brothers die for? What did any of them die for? The question hung in the air, unanswerable, unbearable. because they all knew. Their brothers, their fathers, their friends had died for old men's pride, for emperors and generals who sent young people to die while they stayed safe, had died for lies wrapped in flags and hymns. That night, the barracks divided. Some women moved their bunks to one side, Hannah's side. The believers, those who refused to accept American kindness, who saw it as weakness, as betrayal, as proof of brainwashing. Others stayed with Fumiko, the pragmatists, those willing to acknowledge reality even when it hurt. Akiko found herself in the middle, literally, her bunk between the two groups, torn, unable to fully commit to either side, because both were right and both were wrong, and the truth was too complicated for simple camps. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to women cry quietly in the darkness. On one side, Hannah's group, crying for lost honor, for lost beliefs, for the death of everything they thought was true. On the other side, Fumiko's group, crying from guilt, from the shame of being fed while their families starved, from the impossible weight of survivors' gratitude. And in the middle, Akiko, crying for all of it, for the complexity, for the confusion, for the slow, painful death of hate and the terrifying birth of understanding. The next morning brought no answers, just another breakfast, more bacon, more eggs, more coffee. The routine continued, work in the gardens, payment in scrip, small purchases at the canteen, slow, methodical days that should have been punishment but felt almost like peace. On the fourth week, something changed. A dozen women were selected for an outside work detail. Akiko was among them. They would be taken to a local farm to help with harvest, to work outside the fence, in the real America. The truck ride was different this time. No canvas cover, open air. The guards were more relaxed. Jake Morrison sat on the bench, his rifle across his lap, but his posture easy, not threatening. Just present. The women sat across from him, watching the countryside roll past. California in late summer was golden green, fields of wheat turning amber under the sun, orchards heavy with fruit, farmhouses painted white, red barns, horses in pastures, cattle grazing on hillsides. America untouched by war. America abundant. America impossible. They drove through a small town, Main Street lined with shops, hardware store, grocery, diner with a red and white striped awning. People walked on sidewalks, carried shopping bags, went about their lives, normal lives, safe lives. Children played in a park, swinging on swings, laughing. Akiko watched it all, trying to reconcile this reality with everything she had been taught. America was supposed to be suffering, collapsing, weak. But this looked like prosperity, like peace, like a country that had won a war and was already moving forward, building, growing, living. The farm belonged to a man named Ben Thompson, 58 years old, weathered face, calloused hands. He had served in World War I, had seen combat in France, had killed men and watched friends die, had come home and built a life, a farm, a family. Now he grew vegetables, raised chickens, lived quietly. When the truck pulled up to his property, Ben stood waiting. His wife Mary beside him, their two daughters, Betty 17, Sue 14, and all of them watching the Japanese prisoners with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. The guards helped the women down from the truck. Jake spoke to Ben. They shook hands, old acquaintances maybe, or just two veterans who recognized each other. Ben nodded toward the fields, rows of tomatoes ready for harvest, beans climbing poles, squash spreading across the ground. We need help bringing it in. If y'all work hard, there'll be lunch, fair trade. The women filed into the fields, began working, picking tomatoes, careful not to bruise them, placing them gently in wooden crates. The work was familiar, rhythmic. The sun was hot, but not unbearable. The earth smelled rich, alive, real. Ben walked through the rows, watching, evaluating. He stopped near Akiko, watched her work for a moment. She was efficient, careful, knew what she was doing. You grow vegetables in Japan. It was not quite a question. Akiko paused, looked up, nervous. Yes, my grandfather, farmer. Ben nodded. Good. Good farmers understand the land. Don't matter where you're from, the earth is the earth. He walked on, left her kneeling there, processing his words. The earth is the earth, simple, profound, universal. At noon, Mary Thompson came out with lunch, fried chicken, golden brown, still hot, cornbread, crumbly and sweet, lemonade, cold and tart and perfect. She set it out on long tables in the shade of an oak tree, gestured to the guards, then hesitated, looked at the Japanese women, made a decision. Y'all work hard, eat. She set out plates for them too. Equal portions, same food. No difference between prisoner and guard, between enemy and American. Just people, just workers, just human beings who needed to eat. Akiko took a plate, sat at the end of a table, picked up a piece of chicken, bit into it. The skin was crispy, salty, seasoned with something she could not name. The meat was tender, juicy, perfect. She had not tasted chicken in 2 years, had forgotten how good it could be. Mary Thompson watched her eat, saw the tears starting again, walked over, sat down beside her, put a hand on her shoulder. Just a touch. Brief, warm. It's just lunch, honey. But it was not just lunch. It was kindness. It was inclusion. It was an American farm wife choosing to see a Japanese prisoner as a person, as someone who worked hard and deserved to eat, as someone worthy of a meal, of a touch, of basic human decency. Akiko bowed her head, a deep Japanese bow, the gesture of profound thanks. Mary looked surprised, then smiled, patted her shoulder again. You're welcome. After lunch, Sue Thompson approached the prisoners. The 14-year-old daughter, curious, brave, she sat on the grass near where they rested, looked at them with open interest. What's your name? She asked Akiko directly. Akiko, I'm Sue. Are you scared, being here? Akiko thought about the question. Yes, but also confused. Why confused? You are kind. We were told Americans were cruel. Sue shrugged. The simple wisdom of youth. Well, they lied to you. Such simple words, such profound truth. They lied to you. Not we lied, not America lied, but the faceless they, the propagandists, the war makers, the people who controlled information and shaped belief. They lied, and Sue Thompson knew it, and said it, like it was obvious. As they worked through the afternoon, Ben told stories about the war, about France, about the Germans he had fought, some he had killed, some who had killed his friends, about the end of the war, about guarding German prisoners, about seeing them as young men, scared, far from home, about choosing not to hate them anymore. War's over, Ben said, working beside Akiko in the tomato rows. Time to be human again. Can't live in hate forever. It'll eat you up inside, make you something you're not. His words settled into Akiko's heart, joined the growing weight of evidence. The bacon, the shower, the chocolate, the garden lesson, the letter opportunity, and now this, a veteran who had killed her country's allies, who could hate her, who instead fed her fried chicken and taught her that the earth was the earth, that humanity was humanity, that the war was over and it was time to choose. On the truck ride back to camp, Akiko sat quietly. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink and purple, the kind of sunset that looked the same anywhere. In Japan, in America, in any place where people looked up and saw beauty. Jake Morrison sat across from her, noticed her tears, said nothing, just nodded. A small acknowledgement, a recognition of what she was going through, the slow, painful shattering of old beliefs, the terrifying birth of new understanding. That night in the barracks, when Hana confronted her again, when Hana demanded to know if she was a traitor, if she had forgotten Japan, forgotten honor, forgotten who she was, Akiko answered differently than before. I have not forgotten who I am, but I'm learning who I was taught to be was based on lies. And I'm choosing to believe what I see, what I taste, what I experience, not what I was told. The divide in the barracks deepened, but Akiko no longer cared which side she was on. She was on the side of truth. However painful, however complicated, however impossible to reconcile with everything she had believed before. The cracks in the wall were widening. Soon the wall would fall completely. And when it did, Akiko would have to face the hardest question of all. If everything she had been taught about Americans was a lie, what else had been a lie? And how could she ever go home and tell her mother the truth? That the enemy had shown her more kindness than her own nation. That bacon and fried chicken had accomplished what bombs and bullets could not. That mercy was stronger than hate. That American values were real. And that they had saved her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. 4 weeks into captivity, Hana Kimura made her decision. She would prove them all wrong, would prove that American kindness was a facade, a psychological weapon, a manipulation designed to break Japanese spirit and honor. She would test them, force them to show their true cruel nature. And when they did, everyone would see. Everyone would understand that she had been right all along. On a Tuesday morning during work assignment, Hana refused, simply stood there, arms crossed, face defiant. When the guard asked her to move, she did not. When he asked again, she spat on the ground at his feet. The other women gasped. Fumiko tried to intervene, but Hana pushed her away. The guard was young, Private Miller, 19 years old, nervous, new to the camp. He did not know what to do. He looked around for help, found Jake Morrison watching from across the yard. Jake walked over slowly, boots crunching on gravel. He stood before Hana, 6'4" to her 5'2". He could have crushed her, could have dragged her away, could have shown her what happened to prisoners who defied orders. Instead, he spoke quietly. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Hana responded in Japanese. Loud, angry. Lieutenant Chen translated. "She says she will not work, will not cooperate. Says you should punish her, force her, show your true nature." Jake looked at Hana for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, you don't want to work, you don't have to work. But you still get meals and a bed. That's the Geneva Convention. That's the law." Hana's face showed confusion, then anger. "No, you will punish me. You must." Jake shook his head. "We don't punish people for refusing work. We just don't pay them. Simple as that. You change your mind, let me know." He walked away, left her standing there, confused, furious. The test had failed. The Americans had not shown cruelty, had shown indifference, bureaucratic fairness, which was somehow worse, because it proved they were not monsters driven by emotion. They were people following rules, even rules that protected their enemies. Over the next 3 days, Hana escalated, tore up her food in the mess hall, threw it on the floor. The response was measured, calm. Major Roberts called her to his office. Through Lieutenant Chen, he explained, "You are wasting food. If you do not want to eat, that is your choice. But you will not waste what others could use. If you throw food again, you will be confined to barracks during meals, not as punishment, as practical necessity." Hana tried to start a physical fight, pushed Private Miller, hard. He stumbled back. She pushed again, harder, waiting for him to strike back. To grab her, to hurt her, to prove what Americans really were. But Miller just stepped back, looked at Jake. Jake's voice was tired, almost sad. "Stand down, Miller." He turned to Hana. "Ma'am, I don't know what you're trying to prove, but we're not going to hit you. We're not going to hurt you. That's not who we are." Something in Hana broke. She fell to her knees, began sobbing, great heaving cries that shook her whole body. "Why won't you hurt me? I need you to hurt me. I need proof that you're monsters." "If you're not monsters, then everything I believed is a lie." The words echoed across the yard. Other prisoners stopped working, watched. Some cried with her, because she was speaking what they all felt. The unbearable weight of having your entire worldview shattered. Of learning that everything you were taught was wrong. That the enemy was human. That kindness was real. That you had to question every belief you held. Jake knelt beside her slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. His voice was gentle. "Everything you believed was a lie. Your government lied to you. They told you we were devils so you would hate us, so you would fight us, so you would die for them without question. But we're just people, and you're just people, and this war is over." Fumiko appeared, helped Hana to her feet, led her away. Hana leaned on her, broken, no longer resisting, no longer fighting, just crying. The last believer had fallen. The wall had crumbled completely, and now they all had to face what came next. How to live with the truth, how to carry this knowledge, how to ever go home. That same week, something else happened. Something that would test American values in a way Hana never could. Something that would prove whether kindness was real or just convenient. Nurse Helen Patterson received a telegram. She was in the medical office, alone, doing paperwork. The knock came at the door. An officer handed her the yellow envelope, the kind everyone dreaded, the kind that meant someone was not coming home. Helen's hands shook as she opened it, read the words that would change everything. We regret to inform you that your son, Private David Patterson, was killed in action in the Philippines on August 12, 1945. He died serving his country with honor. His remains will be returned when possible. Our deepest condolences. August 12th, 4 days before Japan surrendered, 4 days before the war ended, 4 days too late. Her baby boy, her only child, 22 years old, dead in a jungle on the other side of the world, fighting Japanese soldiers. And now she stood in an office where she treated Japanese prisoners, where she examined them, cared for them, saw them as patients and as human beings. The paper fell from her hands. She sat down heavily in her chair, stared at nothing, tried to breathe, could not. The world tilted, spun. Nothing made sense. David was dead, her son was dead, and Japanese women slept safe in barracks 50 yards away, ate breakfast every morning, received medical care from her own hands, the hands that would never touch her son again, never feel his hair, never hold his face. The door opened. Akiko entered. She had a scheduled appointment, routine checkup. She saw Helen's face, saw the telegram on the floor, saw the grief written in every line of the nurse's body. Bad news, Akiko asked quietly, her English still broken but improving. Helen looked up, eyes red, face wet. My son, he died, in the Philippines. The words hung between them, heavy, terrible, defining. Akiko froze, understood immediately. Helen's son, killed by Japanese soldiers, and Akiko was Japanese. This was the moment. This was the test. What would happen now? Would Helen scream, strike her, throw her out, show the hate that must be hiding under all that kindness, show that American mercy had limits, had conditions, had boundaries that Japanese blood crossed? Helen stood, slowly, walked toward Akiko. Akiko braced herself, ready for the blow, the rage, the violence she deserved. Helen reached her, stopped, looked into her eyes, and then did something impossible. She pulled Akiko into an embrace, wrapped her arms around her, held her tight, and sobbed into her shoulder. Great racking sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken and beyond words. My baby. He was just a baby, only 22. My baby boy. Akiko stood rigid, shocked beyond movement, beyond thought. This woman's son had just been killed by Japanese soldiers, and she was hugging a Japanese prisoner, crying on her shoulder, seeking comfort from the enemy. It made no sense. It violated every rule, every expectation, every possible response. But slowly Akiko raised her own arms, wrapped them around Helen, held her while she cried. Two women, two mothers' sons lost to war, one American, one Japanese, both grieving, both human, both holding each other because pain knows no nationality, because loss is universal, because sometimes the only response to unbearable sorrow is to hold someone, anyone, even your enemy, especially your enemy. They stood like that for a long time, Helen crying, Akiko holding her. No words, just presence, just shared grief, just the recognition that war takes from everyone, destroys everyone, leaves no one whole. Finally, Helen pulled back, wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, that was unprofessional. Akiko's voice was thick with her own tears. I'm sorry, sorry for your son, sorry for war, sorry for everything. Helen touched her face, gently, like a mother. You didn't kill him. War killed him, and hate, and fear. All the things that make us forget we're all human. She picked up the telegram from the floor, folded it carefully, put it in her pocket, straightened her uniform, took a breath. Now let's do your checkup. Work helps, routine helps, and you deserve care. My son would have wanted that. He died for a better world, not for revenge. That evening, word spread through Camp Norton. About Helen, about her son, about the telegram. The guards talked quietly. Some expected her to quit, to request transfer, to refuse to work with Japanese prisoners. But Helen did not. She showed up the next morning, did her job, examined prisoners with the same gentle care, the same professionalism, the same basic human decency, and every prisoner knew what it cost her, knew what she had lost, knew that she could hate them and no one would blame her. But she chose not to, chose to honor her son by staying human, by not becoming what the war wanted her to become, by proving that American values were not conditional, were not dependent on convenience, were real even when they hurt. Akiko wrote in her diary that night, "Today I learned what American values really mean. Nurse Helen lost her son to Japanese soldiers, and today she hugged me, cared for me, saw me as human. I do not know what I believe about God, but if there is a God, he must look like Nurse Helen. Mercy when mercy is impossible. Kindness when kindness costs everything. This is what makes America different. Not power, not wealth, but the choice to stay human even in unbearable pain." 6 weeks into captivity, the women were allowed to use a community bathroom that had full-length mirrors, real glass mirrors, clear, undistorted. Most had not seen themselves properly in months, some in years. They filed in nervously, unsure what they would find. Akiko stood before a mirror, looked at her reflection, and did not recognize the woman looking back. Her face had filled out. Cheeks that had been hollow now had color, warmth, life. Her hair was clean, shiny, no longer brittle and dull. Her eyes were clearer, brighter. She looked healthy. She looked alive. She looked like someone who had been creating 3 meals a day, sleeping in real beds, living without constant fear. She touched her face, pressed her fingers to her cheeks, making sure the reflection was real, that it was truly her. Other women gathered around their own mirrors, having the same revelation. They were transformed. In 6 weeks of American captivity, they had gained weight, regained health, regained their humanity. "We look Japanese again," one woman whispered. "For months we looked like ghosts, now we look like people." Fumiko stood at the center mirror, tears streaming down her face. "I should be ashamed that I'm healthy, but I'm not. I'm grateful, and that makes me ashamed." The contradiction, the guilt of survival, the betrayal of comfort, it hung over all of them. They had been taught that Americans were evil, that capture was worse than death. But here they were, healthier and safer than they had been under their own military's care. The enemy had restored their humanity. Their own nation had stripped it away. That afternoon, Akiko was working in the garden when Jake approached. He had been quieter than usual lately, more withdrawn. She had noticed but had not asked, had learned that Americans valued privacy, did not pry into pain. But today Jake spoke first. "You doing okay?" Akiko looked up. "Yes. Garden is good. Peaceful." Jake nodded, stood there for a moment, then said something unexpected. "Got a letter from home today, about my brother." Akiko set down her tools, waited. Today would have been his 20th birthday. Tom. His name was Tom. He loved horses, wanted to be a rancher like our pop. "Never got the chance. I'm sorry," Akiko said quietly. Jake looked at her directly, his blue eyes intense. "Honest. You know what the hardest part is? He died fighting Japanese soldiers. And here I am, protecting Japanese prisoners, feeding them, making sure they're safe. Sometimes I wonder if I'm betraying him." The admission hung in the air, raw, painful. True, Akiko did not know what to say. What could she say? She was Japanese. His brother died fighting her people. Any words felt inadequate, insulting even. But Jake continued. "Then I remember what my pop said. Tom died for American values. And one of those values is we don't become monsters even when monsters hurt us. We stay human. We stay American." He looked at Akiko. "You didn't kill my brother. You were just a radio operator on some island. You were following orders. Same as him. War put us on opposite sides, but war's over now. And I can choose to hate you or I can choose to see you as a person. I choose to see you as a person. Akiko felt tears rising. My father died in Tokyo firebombing. American bombs. I hated Americans for that. But you, Sergeant Morrison, you and Nurse Helen, you showed me that hate is taught, but so is kindness. And kindness is stronger. They stood in the garden, former enemies, sun warm on their backs, earth rich beneath their feet. Not friends yet, but not enemies anymore. Something new, something without a name, something that proved mercy was possible even after unbearable loss. 2 months into captivity, Major Roberts made an announcement. The women were gathered in the main hall. His voice was official, formal, but not unkind. Ladies, you will be repatriated. Ships are being organized to return you to Japan. You have 2 weeks to prepare. The news hit differently than expected. Some women cried with joy. Others sat in silence. Hana looked terrified. They were going home, to families, to homeland, to everything they had left behind. But they were also leaving safety, leaving abundance, leaving the strange sanctuary of Camp Norton, going back to a defeated nation, an occupied nation, a nation that would see them as tainted, as dishonored, as women who should have died rather than be captured. That night, conversations in the barracks were subdued. What will we find? Will our families still be alive? Will they accept us? How do we explain where we've been, what we've experienced, that the enemy was kind, that we were treated well, that we ate bacon and chocolate, that we are healthy while they starved? Akiko lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, afraid of what came next, more afraid than she had been arriving at Camp Norton, because returning to Japan meant facing judgment, meant carrying an impossible truth, meant living with the knowledge that everything she had been taught was wrong, and having to pretend it was not, having to hide her transformation, having to act as if American kindness had not changed her forever. On the second to last day, Jake found Akiko in the laundry room. He carried a brown paper bag, handed it to her without ceremony. For the journey. Inside, she found 3 Hershey bars, a pack of crackers, a small patch with the Texas flag, and a photograph. Jake, his father, and a younger man who must have been Tom, all 3 standing in front of a ranch house, smiling, before the war, before death, before everything changed. On the back of the photograph, written in careful handwriting, to Akiko, may you find peace. May America's kindness stay with you. Jake Morrison, Texas. Akiko stared at the photo, at the chocolate, at the impossible gift from an impossible friend. Why? Jake's voice was quiet. Because 30 years from now, I want you to remember that not all Americans were your enemy, and I want to remember that not all Japanese were mine. Akiko bowed, the formal Japanese bow of utmost respect. When she straightened, her voice was steady despite the tears. I will never forget Sergeant Morrison. Never. Jake extended his hand, American gesture, handshake between equals. She took it, felt the calluses from ranch work, felt the strength that had been used to protect her instead of hurt her, felt the humanity in his grip. They shook hands. Former enemies, now something else. Something that proved the war had not destroyed everything, that mercy still existed, that people could choose to be better than their worst moments. That evening, the nurse Helen called Akiko to the medical office. She looked tired, older. Grief had aged her, but her eyes were still kind. I have something for you. She opened a drawer, pulled out a small gold cross on a chain. This was David's. He wore it every day. I want you to have it. Akiko stepped back. No, I cannot. Your son. Helen moved forward, put the necklace in Akiko's hands, closed her fingers around it. My son would want someone to have it, someone who understands what war costs. You lost your father, I lost my son. We both know grief, take it. Remember that love is stronger than hate. Why are you so kind to me? Akiko's voice broke. After everything. Helen smiled sadly, because that's what my son died for. He died so that one day women like you and me could stand in the same room without hate. He died for peace, for understanding, For the America that's better than its worst moments. If I hate you, he died for nothing. They embraced 2 women, 2 losses, 1 humanity, proof that even enemies can find common ground in grief, in hope, in the choice to honor the dead by staying human. The ship that took them back to Japan was cleaner than the one that brought them. Better food, respectful crew. But as they sailed closer to their homeland, anxiety grew. They were returning to ruins, to occupation, to shame. Every day brought them closer to facing the consequences of survival. When the ship pulled into Yokohama Harbor in late November, the women gathered on deck. Looking at Japan for the first time in months, what they saw broke their hearts. Buildings reduced to rubble, harbor filled with sunken ships, people on docks thin and ragged, desperate. Japan defeated, Japan destroyed. Japan occupied by these very Americans who had fed them bacon and given them chocolate. The irony was crushing. They had been safer with the enemy than they would be with their own people. They disembarked, were processed by American occupation forces, given identification papers, released. No crowd met them. No one cared about the return of 47 female prisoners of war. There were bigger problems, bigger priorities. They scattered, each seeking family, seeking home, seeking anything familiar in a landscape transformed by defeat. Akiko took a train to Osaka. The journey showed her the scope of destruction. Cities burned, countryside scarred, bridges destroyed, people everywhere. Homeless, hungry, moving like ghosts through ruins. This was the Japan she had fought to protect. This was what her father had died for. This was the reality that propaganda had hidden. She found her mother in a refugee shelter, a building that had once been a school, now housing hundreds. Her mother was 52 but looked 70, thin, hollow-eyed, aged by grief and starvation, but alive. When she saw Akiko, she dropped the bowl she was holding. It clattered on concrete. Mother. Just that one word. Mother. They ran to each other, embraced, both crying, both shaking, alive, against all odds, against all expectations. Alive. That night in the corner of the shelter that her mother called home, they talked. Her mother asked the question Akiko had been dreading. Where were you? What happened? Akiko told the truth. Was captured by Americans, taken to California, held as prisoner of war. Her mother's face went white. Oh, my child, the shame, what they must have done to you. No, mother, it wasn't like that. They fed us, gave us medical care, treated us with dignity, protected us from angry civilians, paid us for work. Her mother stared, unable to process. But Americans are brutal. Everyone says, everything we were told was a lie, mother. They treated us better than our own military did at the end. They saw us as human beings. Her mother struggled with this. Years of propaganda, years of belief. Now her daughter telling her the enemy showed mercy, that Americans were kind, that everything she thought she knew was wrong. Were you grateful? It was almost a whisper. Akiko met her eyes. Honest, yes. And that's the hardest thing to carry. I was grateful to the enemy, because they fed me while you starved. They sheltered me while your city burned. How do I live with that guilt? Her mother took her hand. You live because you're alive. You live because someone chose mercy over cruelty. You live because, even in war, humanity persists. That's not shame, daughter. That's grace. 5 years passed. Akiko rebuilt her life. Married a quiet man, a carpenter helping reconstruct Osaka. Had a daughter, named her Emiko. Hope. She worked as a translator for American occupation forces, a controversial job. Some saw it as collaboration. But Akiko did not care. She knew something they did not. Knew that Americans were not the demons propaganda had painted. Were just people. Flawed, complicated, but capable of extraordinary kindness. She kept Jake's photograph in a drawer, the Hershey bar wrappers pressed between pages of a book, Helen's cross around her neck, hidden under her clothes. Private reminders of a truth she could not speak aloud. That the enemy had saved her life, had restored her humanity, had proven that mercy was real. In 1952, 7 years after the war, a letter arrived, forwarded through the Red Cross, from America, from Emily Patterson, Helen's daughter. Akiko opened it with shaking hands. Dear Akiko, my mother Helen passed away last month. Before she died, she talked about you often. She said meeting you changed her life, that you helped her heal from losing my brother. She wanted me to find you. To tell you, her last words were, tell Akiko I'm proud of what America did. And I'm proud of who she became. I'm coming to Japan next year with my husband. He's in the Air Force stationed in Tokyo. Would you meet with me? With love, Emily Patterson. Akiko read the letter 3 times, crying. Helen was gone. The woman who had hugged her after losing her son, who had given her David's cross, who had proven that American values were not just words, were real, were lived, were powerful enough to overcome even the deepest grief. She wrote back immediately. Yes, I would be honored to meet you. Your mother saved my life, not from death, but from hate. I will never forget her. The years continued. Akiko raised her daughter, told her carefully edited stories about the war, about kindness, about choosing humanity over hate. Emiko grew, asked questions. Akiko answered honestly but not completely. Waiting for the right time to tell the whole truth. In 1965, 20 years after the war ended, that time came. Akiko received another letter from Emily. She would be in Tokyo. There was a United States-Japan friendship ceremony at the American Embassy. Important people would be there. Veterans, diplomats, survivors. Would Akiko attend? And Emily had a surprise. Something her mother had wanted Akiko to have. Something that would complete the circle. Akiko went to Tokyo, wore her best dress, Helen's cross visible now, no longer hidden. She was 43 years old, a wife, a mother, a survivor. She stood in the grand hall of the American Embassy, surrounded by people celebrating peace, celebrating reconciliation, celebrating the impossible friendship between former enemies. And then she saw him, across the room, tall, red hair now streaked with gray, but unmistakable. Jake Morrison, utter, weathered, but the same blue eyes, the same quiet strength, the same man who had stepped in front of a bottle to protect her, who had fed her bacon, who had taught her to pull weeds, who had given her a photograph and chocolate and hope. Their eyes met. Time stopped. 20 years collapsed into a moment. Akiko walked toward him, her heart pounding, her hands shaking, uncertain if this was real, if he would remember, if the connection they had felt was just her imagination. Jake turned, saw her approaching. His face showed recognition, surprise, joy. Akiko. Is that Akiko Tanaka? Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. Sergeant Morrison. Jake. Just Jake now. I never thought I'd see you again. Neither did I. They stood facing each other, 20 years of life between them. Jake had returned to his ranch, had never married, had devoted himself to the land, to horses, to keeping his father's legacy alive, had thought about Camp Norton often, about the summer he kept his promise, about the Japanese women who taught him that enemies could become human with just a little kindness. Akiko had built a life, had survived the stigma, had raised a daughter, had never forgotten the Americans who showed her mercy, who proved that propaganda was lies, who gave her bacon and chocolate and dignity when the world said she deserved death. Did you keep the photo? Jake asked. Every day. I look at it every day. Did you ever go back to the ranch? Never left. Except for today. They asked me to come, to represent the guards from Camp Norton, to talk about reconciliation. I almost didn't come, but something told me I should. He smiled. Guess I know why now. Emily Patterson appeared. Helen's daughter, now 40 years old. She had her mother's kind eyes, her father's height. She carried a wooden box, carefully, reverently. Akiko, I'm Emily. We've written for years, finally we meet. They embraced, 2 women connected by Helen's memory, by grief transformed into grace, by the choice to honor the dead through living well. Emily opened the box. Inside were items that made Akiko gasp. Helen's nursing badge, letters David had written home about Japan, about wanting to understand the enemy, about hoping for peace, about believing America should be better than its worst impulses. And Helen's diary, From that summer, from Camp Norton, with entries about the Japanese prisoners, about choosing to see them as human, about how one young woman named Akiko had taught her that grief knows no nationality. One entry was marked, August 1945. Emily read it aloud. Today I learned that enemies can teach you more about humanity than friends. These Japanese women showed me that grief is universal, that love transcends nationality, that America's greatness is not in our weapons, but in our capacity for mercy. All three of them were crying now. Jake, Akiko, Emily, three people connected by one summer, by bacon and tears, by promises kept, by mercy given when revenge would have been easier, by the choice to stay human when the world demanded monsters. Jake spoke, his voice rough with emotion. We were enemies once, but look at us now. Akiko smiled through her tears. Not enemies. Never again. Friends. They embraced. Japanese woman, American cowboy, nurse's daughter, living proof that mercy triumphs over hate, that kindness is stronger than propaganda, that American values are real, that enemies can become family if someone is brave enough to extend a hand. The ceremony began. Speakers talked about reconciliation, about peace, about the bonds between America and Japan. But in the back of the room, three people held hands, remembered a summer 20 years ago, remembered bacon and showers and chocolate, remembered promises kept and grief shared and humanity restored. If you believe in these values, if you believe America's greatness lies in mercy, not might, share this story. Let the world remember what happened at Camp Norton. Let them know that bacon defeated propaganda, that kindness changed history, that a cowboy kept his promise, and that enemies became friends because someone chose mercy over hate. In your comments, tell us what American value matters most to you. Honor, dignity, mercy, freedom. The values that make us who we are. The values worth fighting for. The values that Jake and Helen and Ben Thompson represented. The values that still define us today. Akiko Tanaka lived until 2003. She spent her final years speaking to students, teaching about reconciliation, about the power of choosing humanity. She always wore Helen's cross, always carried Jake's photograph, always told the truth, that the enemy had shown her mercy, and that mercy had saved her soul. Jake Morrison returned to his Texas ranch, raised horses, taught young people the cowboy code, never stopped believing in American values. Died in 1998. At his funeral, they found Akiko's letters. Everyone. Saved. Treasured. Proof that he never forgot either. Emily Patterson became a teacher. Used her mother's diary to educate about the cost of war and the power of forgiveness. Carried on Helen's legacy. Proved that one generation's mercy becomes the next generation's mission. This is what they taught us. That bacon can defeat propaganda. That hot showers can wash away hate. That a Texas cowboy's promise can change the world. That enemies can become friends. That America's true strength is not in our military, but in our values, in our capacity for mercy, in our willingness to see enemies as human, in our choice to extend a hand even when a fist seems easier. Jake Morrison's father was right. A man's character shows in how he treats those who cannot fight back. And America's character showed in how we treated 47 terrified Japanese women in the summer of 1945. We gave them dignity when we could have given them revenge. We gave them kindness when we could have given them cruelty. We gave them hope when we could have given them death. That is the America worth remembering. That is the America worth fighting for. That is the America that made us great then. And that is the America that will make us great again. Not through power, not through weapons, but through the simple choice to stay human, to keep our promises, to extend mercy even when it cost us, to be the nation that Jake and Helen represented, the nation that proved enemies can become friends, that hate can become hope, that war can lead to peace. All it takes is choosing kindness over hatred, choosing dignity over revenge, choosing to see our enemies as human beings. That is what made America great in 1945. That is what Jake Morrison proved with 4 strips of bacon and a promise. That is what Helen Patterson proved with a hug and a cross. That is what Ben Thompson proved with fried chicken and lemonade. And that is what we must remember today. In a world that seems full of hate, In a time when division seems easier than unity, in a moment when revenge seems more satisfying than mercy, we must remember Camp Norton. Remember the breakfast. Remember the promise. Remember that our values are what define us, and those values are worth keeping, worth fighting for, worth living by. Because the breakfast that changed Akiko's life can still change ours. The mercy that saved her soul can still save ours. The kindness that defeated propaganda can still defeat hate. If we choose it, if we live it, if we remember that we are Americans, and Americans extend mercy, even to enemies, especially to enemies, because that is who we are. That is what makes us different. That is what makes us great. God bless America, the land where even enemies find grace, where bacon defeats hate, where cowboys keep promises, and where mercy triumphs, always.